Well, good afternoon. I'm so glad to see so many of you still here holding out into the afternoon hours, and you had your cookies and your fruit, so don't get sleepy, okay? I want to know, before I start telling you about my caregiving story, I kind of want to know more about you. How many of you are currently caring for a loved one, a family member, a neighbor, someone you know personally? And how many of you have done this in the past? And how many of you think that you'll do this in the future? And how many of you think that you might one day be the recipient of care? Is there anybody who didn't raise their hands? I don't think so. That's why you can see why I called my talk, Caring for Loved Ones, Aren't We All? Because essentially everyone is touched by caregiving in every country across the world, because it's what we do. We take care of people when they need it. And those of you who are currently caregiving are some of the 42 million caregivers in the US on any given month. You're going to find 42 million people who are caring for loved ones, friends, or neighbors. 74% of us work at some point during that journey. How many of you are working caregivers? You have a paid job and then you have your job as a caregiver. That's me too. And I know we have our own special set of challenges, don't we? We have 72% of working caregivers are caring for their parents. A lot of us are caring for our older parents. About 15% care for someone with Alzheimer's disease. About a third live with those they care for. And you'll see in my story that that's what my situation is now. My parents live with me. About 55% have been doing so for more than 3 years. I've been at it for 4 years full-time and many years before that as a long-distance caregiver. And about 2/3 deals with people who have chronic diseases. Now, one of the things that a recent AARP study found was that it's a study called Home Alone. And the reason for that is that so many of us are caring for loved ones who are having really high medical needs. And so we're performing medical tasks. We're dealing with feeding tubes. My dad came home from the hospital with a feeding tube, and we had about 5 minutes of training on how to deal with that feeding tube. We're managing multiple medications. We're dealing with durable medical equipment. We're administering medications and injections. We're dealing with wound care and monitors. We're dealing with really high-level tasks, and there's not a lot of training out there and support for caregivers in these situations. And the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that as the baby boomers are aging, and I'm sure a lot of us in this room are baby boomers, I'm a baby boomer, as we're aging, the ratio of the number of people who are going to be available to care for us is going to start dwindling. So in 2010, there were about 7 potential caregivers for every 1 person over the age of 80 who might need some help. In 2030, when the baby boomers are turning 80, there's going to be a ratio of 4 to 1. And by 2050, a ratio of 3 to 1. So what does that mean for the caregivers? Those of us who are in that 3 to 1 are going to have a lot less support, a lot less of a team that we can rely on to help with the caregiving. And we're going to need a lot of other supports as we go forward into the future. Now, I'm not going to bore you with any more numbers, because in my family we have a very strong tradition of storytelling. And I thought the best way for me to communicate with you the challenges and the joys of caregiving would be to tell you my personal story. Now, my parents, you'll see up in the picture, my dad Robert and my mom Patricia, and I don't know if you can see, but on mom's lap is their dog Jackson, and you're going to hear a lot more about Jackson. He is a schnoodle, schnauzer poodle, something or other mix, we're not sure all together. And they are the center of my life and have been for the past 4 years. But I thought the best way for you to see is to share my own personal family album, my photo album of caregiving. I want to start out with giving you a chance to meet my parents, though.
Back home again in Indiana, and the teams that I can see, the flickering candlelight ain't shining bright through the sycamores at me. The new mown hay gives all its fragrance from the field I used to roam. Oh, the moonlight's fair tonight along the Wabash. Then I long for my Indiana. Home, 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 home. Period.
Yay, Daddy! Yay, Mommy! That's my mom and dad introducing themselves to you and letting you know that our story starts in the state of Indiana. Now, I see somebody has an Indiana sweatshirt on over there. Go Hoosiers! We start out in the state of Indiana. This is my mom. When she was a little girl, she was born in Logansport, grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana. This is my dad. He's a ham. He's pretty much always been a ham and always will be a ham, I hope. He was involved in theater a lot as a kid. My mom grew up to be a beautiful woman and went off to college at DePauw University in Indiana. And my dad did too, but he went off to war. After his sophomore year in college, he's the one on the left, the skinny little guy. He looks like he's about 14. But he was older than that when he went off to war. This is taken in Italy at the very end of the war. He was in the 10th Mountain Division. And they were troops that came in, they were trained to ski and mountain climb, and they came in and got the Germans out of the mountains in the Alps and pretty much ended the war in Europe. But then Dad went back, went to college, met Mom, and they got married. They had an adorable little daughter. Actually, I have to be honest, and they actually had 4 adorable daughters. And I'm the youngest of the 4, the one who's pointing at the camera there. I'm very proud of my red tights. I don't know if you can see them in this picture, but we lived in West Lafayette, Indiana when I was born. My dad was a professor at Purdue University. We grew up and had pretty much an idyllic childhood. My parents were both from Indiana, so we'd go visit relatives all the time. We had a very close family. And when I was 5 years old, we moved to Ohio. So I am a Midwestern girl all the way through. I had this conversation with the people at my table here that I think of Ohio and Indiana as the Midwest, and apparently North Dakota is the Midwest. So it's a big area, right? But it's all about the values and the people that live there. My dad, as I said, was a college professor. He went to teach at Ohio University. And my mom was a homemaker. She got her master's degree when I was in 3rd grade, went back to school. She taught at the college level and worked in a variety of jobs. And we had really a fun childhood. My dad continued to be a ham. This was when he played Horace Vandergelder in Hello, Dolly. He was very involved in theater. Our whole family was as I was growing up. And we had a farm outside of the small town where I grew up in Athens, Ohio. My dad and my mom, both of their grandparents were farmers, and they loved being out. So we had horses and cows and chickens and had a great time there. But in 1981, everything changed. My dad got a position at Arizona State University, chairing the communication department there. So off my parents moved to Arizona, to the land of roadrunners. I took that at my office just recently. Beautiful sunsets and cactus. It was a whole different world for these Midwestern kids. My parents actually really enjoyed this. It was a special time in their life. They had an almost empty nest. I was a sophomore in college at Ohio University, but they built a house and had a pool in the backyard, and my dad's looking pretty buff there, I think. But meanwhile, I was back in Ohio. I was the Ohio University Bob Kitten. Hello. You can see that I had an interesting and fun college career. Back in Indiana, in the meantime, my grandparents were aging. These are my mom's parents, Clara and Harold Stutz. My parents were in Arizona. I was in Ohio. Who was closer? I was much closer than my parents were to both of my grandparents. This is my dad's parents, Genevieve and C.V. Goyer. They were very close, and many of you, I'm sure, grew up very close to your grandparents and spending a lot of family time together. So as my grandparents aged and they needed more support, I felt compelled to be filling in for my parents because they were so far away. My grandmother, Genevieve, developed Alzheimer's disease. My grandfather, 10 years her senior, was her primary caregiver until he really got into his 90s and she was needing more and more help. So I would drive over. I spent a lot of time on the road. I eventually got a job in Columbus, Ohio, and I worked in adult daycare centers and nursing homes, later for the Ohio Department of Aging for many years. And I spent a lot of time driving back and forth, 6.5 hours, going back and forth. My grandfather, as his health deteriorated and my grandmother needed more help, so I got Meals on Wheels for them. I remember going into their house and smelling kind of not a great smell and realizing he had been putting trash bags down on their bed where my grandmother was incontinent. He didn't know what to do. So I really became very involved in helping him and getting help from the Area Agency on Aging and bringing in caregivers. And we were able to keep them in their home until my grandmother was 88 and my grandfather was 98. At that point, they ran out of money. We couldn't figure out any way to keep them in their home, and they went into a nursing home. My grandmother died in 4 weeks. My grandfather died 6 weeks later. It was a very difficult time for me because I was trying to juggle all of these things and working in Ohio and trying to be there. And in 1989, in the midst of all that, everything changed again. This time it was my mom. She had a stroke when she was only 63 years old. Now, my mom was a very talkative, gregarious kind of person. And when she had a stroke, she got aphasia. And you probably know what aphasia is. She knows what she wants to say, but she has a hard time getting it out. So her whole life was around talking and communicating and socializing. And this was a huge change for her. You can see she's still smiling. My mom's amazing. And continues to be amazing. But she had some major challenges since then. She was not paralyzed. She has chronic pain on her right side. My dad, I flew out immediately. I had just started my job at the Ohio Department of Aging the week before, but they were very supportive, and I flew out to Arizona and spent several weeks trying to help her get started into rehab and getting on her way back home. Daddy helped, and so my dad moved into the same role that his dad was playing, where he became the primary caregiver for my mom. At this point, my grandparents were still living, so I really had to help my dad all the more. I spent a lot of time flying back and forth between Arizona and Ohio at that point. And then I moved. I moved to Washington, D.C. to work for AARP, and I had an even further commute from my adorable parents. But my parents are amazing, and my mom really rallied, and my parents continued to live a really full life. My dad worked for a number of years, continued before he retired from ASU, and then my dad became an AARP volunteer. And he worked in Arizona with the AARP for many years, for about 10 years as a volunteer, and my mom went along with him. My mom celebrated her 80th birthday. They traveled to Scotland and New Zealand and did some traveling, enjoyed their yard. They actually have been able to live a really full, active life despite my mom's stroke. But she couldn't cook. She couldn't write. She could still read to a certain extent, but has to really work at that. She couldn't drive. You know, there still was a huge element of caregiving for my dad and support from me and my sisters coming in and saying, oh, have you tried this? Here's a new therapy. Let's try this. So there was that kind of involvement from a distance. In fall of 2008, everything changed again. We're flashing forward here. I changed my working situation. I wanted to be able to be closer and be with my parents as much as needed, because at this point, we were starting to have concerns about my dad developing dementia. And I knew that I needed the flexibility. So I took a job. I changed my situation with AARP. I became a contractor with AARP, and I took a full-time job with a website called grandparents.com. so I could work from home. This is my first day of work on my back porch, which I loved. And I was able to go out to Arizona and telecommute and work there about 2 weeks a month. And so I would go out and help my parents, and then I'd come back. We set up an office in their home for me, so that was my little office, and they were so excited to have me there. And that's about the time Jackson joined our life. Now, Mr. Jackson is a special dog. He's a rescue dog, but he's a service dog for my parents. He's really my dad's constant companion. He keeps my dad focused and in the now. When we go out, when my dad starts to become anxious, as long as where's the dog? As long as he has that dog with him. It's an amazing, amazing relationship. And he watches over Mom. He goes to the dentist, he goes to restaurants with us, he goes everywhere. He's a good boy. So in the spring of 2009, not much longer, that's only about 6 months later, everything changed again. I got laid off from my grandparents.com job. So here I changed my whole world to be able to care for my parents better, and now I had to figure something else out. Well, it all works out. Do you ever have that feeling like the whole world is falling apart and the rug is being pulled out from underneath you? And then you look back on it and you say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. That's really what happened with me. Because my mom, the same day I got laid off, my mom went in the hospital. And I had a sister who had been living in Arizona, around the corner from them, very near. And she had been helping them with a lot of the local things, going to doctor's appointments. I had been managing the finances more from a distance. We'd been working together as a team. But at this point, she kind of threw up her hands. She had a special needs daughter who she was taking care of. She just felt like she couldn't do it anymore. At the same time, we decided my dad should stop driving. And as is true for many people, when you stop driving, what does that mean? No freedom, you don't have wheels, you can't go places. My dad did not want to be isolated. He wanted my parents to have the opportunity to be around people and go places, so he wanted to move. He wanted to move to a senior living community, and my mom didn't really want to. She loved her home. But she also understood that the home was beginning to be too much for my dad to take care of. So she agreed, and it's like everything gets thrown up in the air, and then it settles down, and somehow it settles down the way it's supposed to. So I ended up having the freedom. I went back to AARP, and they put me on even more of a contract so that I'm working much more with AARP again. I have wonderful, wonderful people I work with there who are very flexible and know that I can do my work from anywhere, and that's all they care about. And so I am able to do that, and we had what I like to call the big move. We ended up moving my parents to a senior living community when we went through a whole process of determining what was the best thing. Assisted living, independent living, what did they need, what was available. Now, we're lucky in Phoenix because within 5 miles of my parents' home, there were 25 choices. A lot of places, the rural town where I grew up in Ohio, there would have been lucky if there were 3. And I know a lot of you live in rural areas probably who wouldn't have that many choices. What we found was a place that was a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community. And my parents ended up moving into an independent living apartment, and we paid for some extra personalized care. I moved to Arizona from Washington, D.C., so that I could be near them and help with all the support that they needed. I got a housemate for my house in Washington, D.C. area so that I could still go home when I needed to go back about 1 or 2 weeks a month. In the beginning, I went back. So I was commuting back and forth. We went through the house. My mom found her wedding gown. We all got into the act with hats. My dad found his letter sweater from high school, and it still fit him. How about that? And we tried to make it as much fun as possible as this process can be. Now, we were lucky because I was going to stay in the house. The house was upside down. In Phoenix, at that time, it was not a time to sell a house. So I needed a place to stay anyway, so it kind of worked out. I took over the house payments. My parents moved into the senior community. I remember the last night in the house and my parents in their bedroom. Every night at that time, my dad would read a daily Bible devotional to my mom before they went to sleep at night. And I went in, I was taking pictures of them, and I went out in the hallway, and I sat on a chair in the hallway, and the tears just streamed down my face because I knew this was a major turning point. It would never quite be the same again. My parents were going to be in a different situation, and this home that they had made that was home to all of us, even if we hadn't grown up in that house, was never going to be quite the same. And I didn't know how I was going to do all this and change my life so much and make myself a home in that home. But the next day, the movers came, 2 men in a truck, and we loaded up the truck. We moved to the new apartment. I don't know if you can you see these pictures very well? Do you see that there's something missing there? There's a sink missing. The whole bathroom was not finished. We showed up with the movers truck and they had been renovating the bathroom and there was no sink. So that was a little disappointing, shall we say. They heard about that from me, but what could we do? We had the trucks full. My dad was very flexible. He shaved at the kitchen sink, and they settled in. They got used to it. I made a priority of setting up the basic things they needed the most to begin with, and I ended up staying with them for quite a few weeks, being with them every night, helping them transition to the new routine, especially helping my dad find things like the light switches and get himself into a routine. I think in some ways with his dementia, this change was actually good for him because he had to learn all of these new things, and somehow it stimulated his brain to a certain extent. He had to learn new things. And he did amazingly well. He liked it because there was an exercise room, and my mom was able to get physical and occupational therapy right there on site, which was very helpful. But this all costs a lot of money, doesn't it? And my parents had planned quite well. They had long-term care insurance, which I decided this was a time that we were going to kick in the long-term care insurance. They were both evaluated. Their policy covers home health, assisted living, and skilled nursing. And so they were both able to qualify at the home health level based on their medical and health needs. And that was a huge help. And that will last for a number of years, but as you probably know, long-term care insurance does not last forever for most of us. And that policy now, we have about 2.5 years left before that money will run out. And I'm going to have something else figured out by then, right? I had to then get some furniture. We had moved out most of the furniture out of the house. I got a new bed. Mom and Jackson helped me try it out and see if we liked it. But I continued doing my job. I traveled to New York to be on the CBS morning show. And this is my boyfriend. He was a captain in the fire department in Baltimore County. So we already had a little bit of a long-distance relationship from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, and now I'm in Phoenix. We started dating almost 7 years ago, and we are still together, believe it or not. The miracle of technology keeps us together and travel, and we spend as much time together as we can, but let me tell you, it's not easy. It's a major challenge to have all that I'm dealing with and try to keep this long-distance relationship going. But he's a special guy, and he has the same values I have, and he believes that taking care of family is a high priority, and he believes in what I'm doing, and he supports me in what I'm doing, even though we both wish our situation was different. Mom continued to have hospital stays, and she had a lot of falls, chronic urinary tract infections, various issues. But we kind of got through it. I had major renovations at the house because we had not one but 2 leaks in both of the bathrooms. So I ended up having to do major renovations in the house in the midst of all this. I celebrated my 50th birthday with my girlfriends. We went up to Sedona, Arizona. If you've never been there, you should go. And I took my parents back to Ohio for what would be probably their last trip to Ohio and Indiana. We went to my nephew's graduation, and this was the last time that our entire family with all the grandkids were together at once. So it was a very special trip, and I'm really glad that I did it. Was it easy? No, it wasn't easy, but that's okay. We figured it out. I did a lot of planning. My niece traveled with me and helped me with my parents, and we did it. And my parents so loved being there. We went out to the farm for some last hikes in the hills of Athens County. We had one last bonfire, and my parents were able to see their farmhouse that they had worked so hard on for so many years one last time. We went then to Indiana, had a family reunion in Kokomo, Indiana. Got to see the road named after our family. How many of you have roads named after your family? And then we came back to Arizona. My parents celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary. And I think they look pretty darn fabulous at that age. My niece and I took my parents to California for her mother's wedding. My sister had gotten married to her husband who lived in California. She later then moved to California. Meantime, more visits to the doctors and the hospitals for my mom, dealing with chronic pain, variety of issues. But they still managed to dance in the living room. I'm blessed in that I grew up with parents who loved each other and made it very clear to us that they did. They danced in the kitchen at night and in the living room if that's where they ended up being, and they still do that. They enjoyed their little apartment. We had a little fence that we put up for Jackson so that he had a little place to go outside in the yard. And I spent a lot of time in airports and on airplanes, and I still do. In the spring of 2011, what do you think? You guessed it. Mom started really having much more acute issues. She ended up in the hospital. We weren't sure what was wrong with her. She was later diagnosed with colitis. She was dehydrated. She'd had terrible issues with what I call the D word. And I'm not shy about saying it because it's something that many caregivers deal with. And that's she had gastrointestinal issues. She had diarrhea. It was a major, major problem. But then everything really went downhill. She had come home from a hospital stay. She was there for 3 days. She came home. We were waiting for the results of her colonoscopy to find out about this colitis issue, and she fell. I had got a baby monitor so that I could hear her if she got up during the night, but she didn't call out to me, and the baby monitor didn't work. I went back later, and it wasn't working at all. And I'd even given her a bell as a backup, but she didn't ring the bell. She got up to go to the bathroom, fell in the bathroom. Only this time, I'll never forget, I went to, get her up, and her legs were just like spaghetti. She couldn't stand. She couldn't walk. We went to the emergency room. After hours and hours of waiting, tests, I remember the doctor called me on the telephone. The nurse brought me to the nurse's station, and I got on the phone with the doctor, and she said, "Your mother's fractured her spine. She needs to go to another hospital for surgery." And I was trying to kind of get this in my head, and she kept saying, and I said, "Well, are you sure surgery? Because, she's very fragile and blah, blah, blah." And finally, she said to me, "Your mother will never walk again if she does not have surgery." She was trying to get through to me, and I can remember the nurse coming up and putting her arm around me because I'm sure she could see on my face what I was trying to grasp and go through, because I knew our lives had changed forever at that moment. We got her to the other hospital. The doctor evaluated, and he said, if we don't do surgery, she will have no quality of life, and she really will never walk again. My mom decided she wanted to have the surgery. It was her choice ultimately, but she said she wanted to go for it. And so she went through a 7-hour surgery, loneliest day of my life, sitting there in her hospital room by myself waiting during that. But she came through. And this is where she was waking up, and my dad was sitting at her bedside waiting for her to wake up. She woke up, and then started what was about a 40-day saga of hospital time. She did well for that surgery. The doctor scheduled a second follow-up surgery. We went down. I took her down to the pre-op area. We're waiting there, getting ready to go into surgery, and they come in and say, "Oh no, she can't have surgery today." I said, "Why not?" She's developed atrial fibrillation in her heart. She had an irregular heartbeat. They couldn't do it. We went back up to her room, and they said, oh, and guess what? She has C. diff. Do you know what C. diff is? It's a horrible bacterial infection that you get in the hospital, kind of like MRSA or some of the other ones that you may have heard more about. It causes terrible diarrhea, horrible, painful diarrhea. My mom already had colitis. This was almost a death sentence for her, and many people do not make it through C. diff. She was treated for the C. diff, treated for the AFib. She actually ended up having the second surgery. She did okay. The C. diff was the most painful, horrible thing. I would be sitting in her hospital room, and she would be screaming in pain. And I'd be trying to clean her up. I almost got a nursing degree when I was in the hospital with my mom. I gave her pre-op baths. I did all these medical tasks, doing everything I could to try and make her more comfortable. And it was kind of a waiting game until she got better. She ended up being discharged and going to rehab. 1 week later, major change in my mom. And I was actually on a vacation. I had finally taken some time off. When she went to rehab, my sister flew out from Ohio and was there, and I had gone to Spain. So I was so far away, and I get this email from my sister saying, we think Mom had a heart attack. Turns out she did have a heart attack. She was in congestive heart failure. She was in sepsis. Her whole bloodstream was infected. She had pneumonia. She had a bad urinary tract infection. She still had the C. diff. I mean, she was sick. I flew back, more weeks in the hospital. But my mom, sometimes it's not about the medicine, it's about the motivation. And for whatever reason, she decided she was going to get through that, and she did. She ended up going back to rehab. She was there for 3 months, and she learned to walk again. Good, Mom. Yay, Mommy. There she goes. And she's up. To roll it. It hurts, so it's kind of challenging. Is that it? But doable. She had to wear a turtle shell brace for about 6 weeks, which was really difficult. That's that blue thing you could see that she had on. But my mom got through it, and she ended up they got back to their apartment, and Mr. Jackson was very happy to see her and have them both in the same place again, because that was really hard for him. He likes to keep his eye on both of them. And Mom did her physical therapy at home there, again with Mr. Jackson's help. He had to be right up there on her shoulder while she was doing her exercises. And we were able to go out. This was the first time she'd gone out to eat since she fell. And then in the winter of 2011, everything changed again. My dad got sick. This time my dad, he ended up having prostate issues and constipation and urinary tract infection, which it seems like it shouldn't be that big of a deal, but for someone who has dementia, it's a huge deal. And his dementia went, in the course of a weekend, went huge dive. So this time it was Mom worrying about Dad, which was a big switch for them. It was Christmas time, so we spent Christmas in the hospital that year. The family gathered. We ate our Christmas dinner in the cafeteria. We sang Christmas songs in Daddy's hospital room. and we did the best we could, and we got through it. And Daddy got to go home, but as I mentioned before, he came home with a feeding tube. Why? Because he had something called a Zenker's diverticulum, a little flap in his esophagus. And when he had been sick, he had been choking from that, and he aspirated and got pneumonia. So the doctors were concerned about that happening again, and he needed to have surgery for that. So until we could have surgery, he had to have the feeding tube, which was a nightmare. It was 2 months of, we were back in the hospital 3 times with the feeding tube clogged. He had to have the whole thing replaced 1 time. It was really, really a difficult thing to deal with. And at the same time, our farm in Ohio, I realized we had to sell the farm because the finances were now starting to get more and more difficult. My parents were needing more care. I couldn't provide all the care. We were having to pay for extra caregivers. And that was a very difficult and emotional thing for me to do as a caregiver, because even though my parents were fine with it, it was still a very difficult thing. My sister and her sons were living at the farm. Now, we ended up finding a buyer who rented the farmhouse back to them, so they got to stay there. So it all ended up pretty well, but still a difficult thing to deal with. But then the most difficult thing of all happened to our family. This is my niece, Shaylee. She was the one who accompanied me with my parents back to Ohio and to California. She was the only grandchild who lived in Phoenix, so she was the closest to my parents. Shaylee had bipolar disorder, and she committed suicide. She was 19 years old. It was 4 days after my dad got out of the hospital. It pretty much put us all on the ground. I had been struggling with a lot and dealing with a lot with caregiving, but this just put me under. I was on my knees. I just couldn't manage everything. And I started paying for more caregivers to come in and help with my parents. And that started a time where I couldn't grieve. I couldn't just stop everything and grieve for my niece, who I'd been very close to, because I had something I had to do. I had to take care of my parents. And in some ways, that was my grace. That was my saving grace, because I had to get out of bed every morning. I had to take care of my parents. I had to deal with the finances. I had to deal with the health care. I had to do all of those things. And that was my motivation. And in many ways, I'm very grateful for that. I'm not sure what I would have done at that point in my life if I hadn't had them needing me 100%. But they did. And Dad had surgery, and we got through that. And he recovered, and he got to eat again. 2 months without eating solid food was real hard for someone who has dementia, and he couldn't understand why he couldn't eat the food. He kept forgetting he had the feeding tube. He'd get up and start to walk away without the machine, and he had to have someone with him all the time. We started having caregivers at that point with them all the time. And sometimes those caregivers were not so well trained, and my mom had more falls. She fractured her nose in one of those falls. We spent more time in emergency rooms. The paperwork piled up, the money was not all there, and I knew we had to make another change. The piggy bank got broke. My dad is a veteran, as I mentioned. I started the process of applying for veterans benefits, aid and attendance benefits. Is anybody here from the VA? Yay, VA. It took a year, but we are now getting benefits from my dad, and that helps, but it still wasn't going to be enough. Caregiving is a very emotional experience. My dad was a college professor. He was very interested in the outdoors. We had a farm when we were growing up. My mom loved to go horseback riding. My parents have both been involved in theater for many years. Where I am with my parents right now is we're kind of at a tipping point. They moved 3 years ago from their home where they lived for 28 years to a senior living community, and they did really well for about 2 years. And then my mom fell and fractured her spine. She went through 2 surgeries, went to rehab, had a heart attack, and During that time, my father had also started to have more problems. He has Alzheimer's disease. We started needing someone with them 24 hours a day. I have to work, I can't be there all the time. My sisters live out of state, so we're moving in together. There are two things that I'm most concerned about in having my parents move back in here with me. One is for their comfort, their safety. The other concern is my own sense of freedom, the ability to have some privacy. I have worked in the field of aging for 30 years, and this is still very hard for me. So I can imagine how people who aren't steeped in this are really isolated even more than I am. My advice to anyone else entering this kind of situation is to take a step back and really do some planning about balancing your lifestyle with their lifestyle. It is a challenge, I'm not going to deny that, but it's a priority because if we don't take care of ourselves, we're not able to take care of someone else. AARP has an amazing online caregiver resource center. We have links to local resources. We have a lot of how-to and tips information. We have some great financial resources on there. We have budget calculator that was really helpful to me. We have to work to educate everyone going forward, and we need to shape the market. We need to say, these are the kind of services we want and need because this is how we want to live. That video was created as part of a campaign that the AARP is working with the Ad Council on raising awareness about the needs of caregivers and trying to help caregivers connect with resources. Are you familiar with the Ad Council? You know Smokey the Bear? This is your brain on, remember the eggs one? This is your brain on drugs. All those kinds of campaigns that you see, those are things the Ad Council does. And they team up with nonprofits that have a good cause, and they try to help with social change. So they get really great ad companies to donate their time to come up with these campaigns. And the video is part of it. You'll also see on your tables this little brochure. And this is one of the brochures, and it has some of the artwork that you may see in ads on television or radio or billboards across the country. So that's what we did. We had another big move, only this time it was a big move back. And all that, you know how I wasn't too worried because my parents moved out, but I was lucky because I was staying in the house and we didn't have to empty the house. Well, now I had to make room in the house because I had bought furniture, they had things, and I had to empty out the garage and make space. So I did several trips to Goodwill. I had to rent an office. I had been working from home, so I packed up my office and rented a lovely office space. My boyfriend came out and totally transformed the garage from this to that. Nice, huh? He's kind of handy like that. And the men are the same guys, 2 men in a truck, came by, moved everything out again, and that garage ended up looking like this. It got filled back up. There was a little bit of order to it, but it took me 9 months to get the car back in the garage. I was glad to have the garage space, but by the time hot weather sets in Arizona, you have to have your garage. So that was my deadline, and then they moved in September, and in May, I got the car back in the garage. My parents adapted. It was interesting. I thought my dad would, because up until the time they moved, he'd come back to the house and have dinner, and he was still familiar with everything there. But when they moved in, it was like a switch was flipped, and he didn't so much. And I think it was because he had gone through the context of it was a place they lived, and then it was a place they visited, and going back to living there again kind of messed him up a little bit. But he's adapted to many things, and he loves to sit on the back porch. My mom is very happy to be back in her home, and Mr. Jackson is fine as long as he's got mom and dad in one place. I hired a live-in caregiver. This is Danielle. She was our first caregiver, who is with us from Sunday afternoon until Friday afternoons, and then I have them by myself on the weekends. My sister, in the meantime, has had a lot of health issues. This is my oldest sister. She lives in Salisbury, Maryland. This picture I just took on Friday because last week I had to fly to Baltimore last minute to help with her because she'd had surgery. She has Cushing's disease. She has a tumor on her pituitary gland that was causing her adrenals to put all kinds of cortisol out and causing a whole myriad of other health problems that she's had for years but not diagnosed this way. So she has diabetes. She had a perforated colon and has a colostomy bag. She has a myriad of issues. And the surgery didn't go all the way that it should have, and she developed blood clots in her legs. And she just needed me there to help her and to kind of get her through this tough time and advocate for her. So on the airplane I went, and I spent last week there with her. I called my sister in California and said, you need to come and be there to help with Mom and Dad. So we just had this kind of mix-up thing. And then when she left, my sister from Ohio came. And this is the life we lead. When I travel, I try to make sure one of my sisters is there because it's not a job for one caregiver. Our caregiver is wonderful, and we have a different one now named Kelly. She's wonderful, but it's a lot to take care of two people, one who has Alzheimer's. My mom needs 100% help in the bathroom. We've got her up walking more, but then she has chronic pain, so she doesn't want to walk. My dad, is at the stage in dementia where every 5 minutes he needs reassurance. What's going on? What's the plan? What are we doing? He just can't be alone. So a typical day, I go to work in my rented office. If a day's going perfect, I get up in the morning, I do some things, I put something in the crock pot for dinner, I run to my office, I work. Usually there's a doctor appointment, so I leave, I take Mom and Dad to the doctor's appointment, I go home, we have dinner, I deal with the finances and the paperwork, and I continue working because I work 24 hours a day, I think, sometimes writing something or doing whatever I need to do. Typical days don't happen a lot. You know how that is? Just when you think you've got a plan, the plan changes. So what I've learned, I wanted to share with you in closing just some of the things that I've learned through this experience. And our journey is not over. We have a lot ahead of us. I know we have many more changes. Everything will change again and again and again. So the first thing I've learned is to get help. To seek help, but also to accept help when it's offered. I want everybody to hold up your pinky fingers for me. All right, do you ever feel like you're hanging on by only your pinky fingers? Like, Whenever you start to feel that way, I want you to hold up your pinky fingers and think, Amy told me to get help. That's the way it is. We cannot do this by ourselves. That's why there's a whole community of networks of support for caregivers. But so many caregivers don't know about that help. Sometimes that help comes in the form of family members. My sister comes and takes my place when I'm away. My boyfriend came and helped me take my parents to a baseball game this summer. And that was so much fun. They hadn't been to a baseball game in ages. This is Debbie. She's my concierge. She helps me with everything from sorting mail to cleaning out closets, getting that garage organized. She runs errands for me. When my parents were more independent still at the senior community, she would go check on them when I was out of town. She'll go pick up prescriptions, pick up dry cleaning. She does a wide variety of things. She takes me to the airport. I don't know what I'd do without her, but that's the kind of help that helps me as the caregiver. Sometimes getting help doesn't just mean getting help for the person you're caring for. It means getting help for you as the caregiver, because that frees me up so I can do the things only I can do with my parents. I want to spend time with my parents. I want quality time with them. I don't want all my time with them to be about doctor's appointments and that sort of thing. I want to have some quality time with them. So she helps me do that. I also have found that a lot of mobile doctoring. This is a mobile x-ray guy who comes and takes x-rays of my mom, so I don't have to take her out places. We have a lot of things that are available in the home now. This is Kelly. She's our live-in caregiver. Sometimes you have to pay people to help. And help also means online resources, support groups, respite programs. There's a lot out there that people don't know about. The second thing I've learned is that it's important to tell my story. And that's why I'm here. Because caregivers are often invisible. People don't realize what we're going through, and I want to make sure that people know what the challenges are, what the joys are, and that the kind of support that we need. I do this through my blog on AARP. I have this new book. You see there's also on your table, this is a free ebook initially. So go on and download it now while you can. I have a lot of tips. I cover everything from finances to legal issues. It's focused on working caregivers, but if you're not working, everything in that book is still relevant for you. I do videos, taking care videos. I do media interviews. But not everybody does what I do. There are lots of ways to tell your story. Whether you're in a workshop, whether you're at a support group, you're at your church, if you're just talking to a neighbor, sharing what you've been through helps others. It's so important that you share your stories. Take pictures. That's another way to share your stories. This is a selfie I took of me and Dad. You know what a selfie is? You hold up your camera and you take a picture of yourself. The kids are way into it. Daddy and I try it. They're not the greatest pictures, but we take a lot of pictures, as you can see. And you know, one of the things I like about taking the pictures, as I go back and look at them, it makes me value what I do. It makes me realize what I'm doing, because I'm going through life. I'm just trying to get through the day most of the time. When you go back and you take a look and you say, yeah, we did that. I give my parents something that many people don't have. People say they don't have a choice. I'm caregiving for someone because I don't have a choice. There's nobody else to do it. Well, guess what? You do have a choice. Everything is a choice. And you need to feel good about the fact that you make that choice to care, because a lot of people are alone. They don't have that helping hand that helps them. You choose to care, and that makes you really, really special. I'm there for my mom when she needs me the most, and I know that, and that's what drives me. That's what keeps me going. I'm there for both my parents when they need me, but I also give them a quality of life. My goal is not just to keep them alive and deal with their health issues. My goal is to give them a good quality of life. Because otherwise, what's the point, right? And not only them, but me. This is my life. This is not dress rehearsal until I go back to living my life again. This is my life. We go to the store, pick out flowers. We go out for ice cream. We go to the theater. Recently, I took them to see a play, which they still love, and my dad can still enjoy the musicals in particular. He has a hard time following plots otherwise, but the musicals he loves. Dad had his first pedicure last week. The man is going to be 90 years old on Monday. He had his first pedicure, and let me tell you, he loved it. I thought, well, I take Mom to get her nails done, and it's so much easier if we all go, right? So he was hilarious. Wow, this feels good. How often should I get this done? He said that over and over again. So Daddy's going to be getting pedicures from now on. He didn't get nail polish, don't worry, but he did love the massage and all of the rest. So we all got our nails done. I do this and I give them security. They can sit in their chairs at night and watch TV, and they don't worry anymore. Daddy's not stressed out worrying about are the bills paid and those things. That's a gift I give them, and that makes me feel good. The value of what I'm doing is what keeps me going. Number 4, create joy. You've seen already some of the things that we do. Again, it's not just about dealing with health issues, and believe me, I deal with a lot of health issues for my parents. Savor those moments. Be mindful. Live in the moment that you're in now, and use humor. Daddy was getting a sleep study. He just looked so hilarious. I had to snap a picture. And of course, he loves to pose for the pictures. And that kind of broke the tension because it was kind of a lot for him to deal with. And this was about 4 years ago, so it was early on, and his dementia wasn't quite as bad. And he did manage to do it at the sleep center. But the humor eased the moment. Daddy recently he puts the covers up over his head when he sleeps. His head gets cold. So a friend of ours knitted him a little cap. Well, she knitted him a bright red cap And so we said, Dad, you want to wear this? He's like, sure. So he gets in bed, he puts that on, and then he has this partial tooth thing. So he takes out his partial at night. So then he gives me this big grin with the tooth missing and the red hat. I'm like, Dad, I got to take your picture. He loved that. My sister and I broke the tension when we were moving Mom and Dad by wearing some lampshades on our heads. Sometimes you just got to do what you got to do, right? And Mr. Jackson also provides some humor now and then. He has to wear glasses every now and then. We do things like bake cookies for the holidays. Again, we celebrate all of the holidays because that's something fun that we can do together. And it's not that hard to do, you know? We dress up for Halloween. My mom and Dad have always done this on their own. They started dressing up to greet the trick-or-treaters. So I continue that tradition. They need my help to do it now, but they still do it and they still enjoy it. Every Saturday night, you'll be pleased to know that Lawrence Welk is our main companion. Thank you, North Dakota, for giving us Lawrence Welk. I snapped this picture one night because the costumes were particularly incredible, I guess would be the word. But we do enjoy Lawrence Welk, and it's Jackson's favorite show. We do things like buy flowers. Daddy always brought flowers to my mom, so now when Daddy goes to the grocery store with me, we always bring home flowers for Mom. That's something that I keep going. It brings us joy. When we go out, this was a recent day. First on Friday afternoons, we have our Fun Friday adventure. So, and I have my parents by myself starting then. We go first for my mom to get her hair done, the same place she's been going for 30 years. The stylist, Paul, is amazing and wonderful, and he helps me get him in and out of the car and everything. Then we went to the chiropractor. Then we got some air put in the tires. I found a place where I don't have to even get out of the car. They put the air, so we sat in the car and got the air in the tires. And Mom and Dad love this because it's life. They don't want to just sit in their recliners all day, every day. They aren't having to do a lot of these things, but they come along. We go to the mall where there's valet parking. Yes. They help get the wheelchair out of the car. They help me a lot. It's a great arrangement. And we go to the Cheesecake Factory and celebrate my parents' 63rd wedding anniversary. So they made a little cake for us. And then we, of course, went to the chocolate shop to get our monthly piece of chocolate. This is a picture I showed you earlier, but I wanted to point out the family bathroom. One of the things I've done is I find where those family bathrooms are because both my parents need my help now in the bathroom. And I go into the men's room with Daddy sometimes, and I certainly take Mom in the ladies' room. We do what we have to do, but these family bathrooms are amazing. So we should all advocate for more of these family bathrooms, yes? We also take time to watch the sunsets. One of the things my dad taught me was to appreciate nature. And so we sit on the back porch and we watch the sunset together. Now, half an hour later, he probably won't remember that sunset, but I will. And I'll always have that moment with him. It's about being in the here and now. Number 5, last but not least, take care of yourself. You're the only you that they've got. Nobody can replace you, not really. For me, it's big doses of nature. That renews me and rejuvenates me. The beach, the mountains, wherever you need to go. Sometimes it's just a cup of coffee that helps me take care of myself. Taking a walk with my dad is one of my favorite things to do. One of the things I've found is that I have to find ways to take care of myself while also taking care of them, because there are only so many hours in the day. So we go swimming. I actually hired a woman who does arthritis exercise with older people. She did it in the community where my parents lived. So I have her come to the house. We're lucky we have a pool in our backyard. Everyone in Phoenix has a pool in their backyard. So we do swimming, but I come home from work so that she gives me exercises to do at the same time. I help with Daddy getting in and out of the pool. I motivate him. We sing songs. But I'm exercising also. And that's one of the ways I take care of myself while taking care of them. Got to watch the blood pressure. I try to eat healthy. Every now and then, I got to run into Walmart and get me some ho-hos. But I do try to eat healthy, and we actually are trying to maintain sort of a gluten-free and dairy-free diet for my parents because I've done some reading on some various things that I think might help them. I play piano whenever I can. That's a great outlet for me. You have to know what your own best outlets are. And that's a very individual thing. So everyone has to figure out what that is for themselves. And it may take 5 minutes or it may take 5 days. You have to have the range because you're not often going to have vacations. I recently used all of my American Express rewards points to go to Sedona, Arizona to a spa for 2 nights. It didn't cost me a penny. It was all, when I buy things, I use that American Express card so I rack up points. It's a great way for a caregiver to get a break. And when I can, I spend time with my boyfriend, and we love to both be out in nature, and we do what we can. But you have to take care of your other relationships. So these lessons learned are what I want you to remember. Get help, share experiences, value what you do, create joy, and take care of yourself. Now, remember I had you hold up your pinky fingers? So hold up your pinky fingers again. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 things I've told you, right? Now wrap them down. Number 5 was what? Take care of yourself. If you wrap number 5 around all of the others, look how strong you are. We really are strong, and that's what we have to remember, but we can't be strong without number 5, okay? Now, I know this is not easy because I'm living this too. My health has suffered. I have my own challenges in trying to do this. But it is a top priority because literally, if you don't have that thumb, you're not very strong, are you? You've got to be strong, and because if you are, you can do it. Okay? So I want all of you, whenever you start to feel like you can't do this anymore, get your thumbs up, wrap them around yourself, and remember how strong you are and the people you're working with are, and remind them of that, of the value that they provide. So I want to make sure that you have the card here. You can get more of my tips online or in the book here. Contact me anytime. I love to hear your stories and blog ideas. But most of all, thank you so much for having me here. And I hope that sharing my story will enrich your stories. Thank you.